Laurie, welcome to the show.
Wow, that was a very fiery opening. I thought it was great. It's so neat to hear a guy say that, a male comic say that, a funny male comic say that, a male comic who murders say that. It's
on
awesome.
on stage. We're
Yeah,
talking
yeah, it's
breaking
really
news.
cool.
Well, thank you, Laurie. I have the utmost respect for you as well. And maybe before we delve in, and I'm looking at you because ordinarily this is where the camera's at, but
Right.
I want to look at your face, so I'm looking at my computer right now, just so you know
I
where.
I'm not looking at your face. I'm looking at my camera, so it looks like I'm looking at you. Is that
Wow,
okay?
no, that is, that now I almost feel pressure that I should do the same. I'll be professional. So, Laurie, I want to first express my condolences to you as your mom, Joanne, just recently passed of COVID.
Thank you. Thanks.
You're welcome. And as is your your thing now, you talked us through on Twitter. You essentially live tweeted the experience of your mom's illness and eventual passing. You tweeted about it as you did with your father a few years prior. And I just want to mention that that eventually became a book, Dead People Suck, a guide for survivors of the newly departed.
Yeah.
So tell me the kind of the way that developed, and was there any kind of feeling of like, oh, here we go again?
Yeah, exactly. Like, I can't believe this is happening again. Yes, for sure. And I don't know. I was so shocked that she actually tested positive for COVID. It just, it's one of those things where you read about it happening someplace else, and you're like, whoa, this thing dropped in our lap now? That's so strange. And then I tweet about everything, so it's not a shock. I would never keep that a secret. But then the circumstances of it were so bizarre and new, and I also, in addition to worrying about my mom, was conscious that nobody knew that this is what it's like, or very few people did. That, like you read about not being able to see a loved one when they're dying, but then when it's your loved one and it's your mother, and it was, I don't know, I just needed to get the word out that this is awful, and do what you can to mitigate the acceleration of the virus, I guess.
Yeah, and to what extent would you say, having gone through this with your father and having live tweeted that and shared and made yourself vulnerable and shared the grief and the grieving process, were you flashing back to that at all, or was this its own kind of entity? Like, how did the two? I hate to say compare, but like, what were the feelings relative to having gone through it with your father?
It compared, I mean, the circumstances I was able to compare and just be very outraged that my mom wasn't having the same sort of hospice experience that my dad had. That, my dad, we were all around him and he got to say goodbye, and it was like perfect, right? And my mom, was in a hospital. The only people that were able to see her, except for myself and my sister, for an hour and a half, were, people that she never met before, doctors, physicians, I mean, it's everyone doing their job, but it's just, it's an awful way for an elderly person to go out. Like, no one deserves that. No old person deserves that. You deserve to have one last round with all your grandchildren and all that kind of stuff.
Sure.
So just that, comparing it. And then I think what was different this time is COVID is still pretty new, and it was, even newer mid-June to have people writing about it, that it was happening to. It seemed like a lot of COVID stories were reporters visiting people and writing their version of what was happening to somebody else. So you always felt like you're peering into someone else's life, and there weren't that many first person experiences, like people that like to write, or for me, people that like to write jokes. So I'm a joke writer, so this is how I'm going to do it,
Right.
So
right.
I guess the fact that it was a new illness, a new way that it it crushes people, and everyone was sort of curious, I think,
Yeah, and I'm kind of a believer in that, like, life kind of positioning you for like the right place, right time. Not, I don't mean that in a willy-nilly
Yeah.
way. I mean over years, like, you were really perfectly positioned to not only write about your mother's passing, but within the context of, like, we're all going through this pandemic. So it was a service. Did you look at it? Would you use the word service as well?
A little bit, yeah, a little bit.
Yeah.
I just, yeah, it just seems like people weren't completely aware,
Mm-hmm.
or they were deliberately not aware.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I mean, if there's another face out there that's saying this is happening to me, and you can identify with their jokes or something like that, then maybe you
Yeah.
personalize a little bit more, and then maybe you are a little more careful, or you make sure your mother or your grandmother doesn't go out, or I don't
Mm-hmm.
know how it
Mm-hmm.
plays out, but
Sure.
it's just like Corona is a ripple effect. Getting people to stop it is a ripple effect, and every little thing makes a difference. It really
Yeah.
does.
Yeah. Now, and there was an element, a large element of advocacy as well, right? Because if I'm not mistaken, you and your sister had to advocate for your mother's care and for being moved to a different facility. Am I right about that?
She was taken to Huntington Hospital in Pasadena, and they did an amazing job. Um, they had been a hot spot in March, and so their COVID ward was really well equipped. They
Hmm.
like learned from that experience, and every single room had its own iPad that families can connect to. So we didn't have to share an iPad with another family.
Mm.
So that was amazing, and we were able to just watch my mom, and my sister would say if she's frowning, it looks like she probably needs more painkiller, and then we call the hospital and tell them our mom was frowning, and take a look at her and stuff. The first couple days they had given her antibiotics because she had viral pneumonia caused by COVID,
Mm.
and then the doctor said, we can intubate her, but she was 82, incredibly frail, didn't want that kind of a thing, and the likelihood of it just prolonging her life in an awful way, it seemed like 100%, right?
Mm.
So
Hmm.
he recommended hospice, which meant they would take her off any kind of medication. They wouldn't try to fix her, and they would just, douse her with morphine, and she would not be in pain. So that started on Saturday. She had tested positive on Thursday. It happened really fast for her.
Mm.
And then my sister and I had heard from a doctor friend of our cousin who was working out here that some hospitals were allowing family to visit COVID members that were terminal, and this
Wow.
particular hospital wasn't. And so we started lobbying. That was the kind of thing we started making a lot of noise.
Hmm.
I posted something on Twitter, and people started contacting the hospital. I think what really worked is my sister's a psychiatrist, and she belongs to this Facebook group full of female physicians. And these ladies put together this letter saying, if I work at this hospital, we do this with a proper PPE, it can be done. And they sent it to Huntington. And the combination, it all kind of worked. On Monday morning, they changed their policy.
Wow.
And we were the first ones allowed to visit our loved one. That was that kind of the timing worked. And we got to spend like an hour and a half with my mom on Monday. And then she died on Thursday.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's significant, though, to have physically been in the room with your mother, as opposed to I can't imagine watching that process on an iPad or however else it would.
It's horrific. I mean, I'm reading of other people that are in that situation right now. Even now, not everyone's allowed to visit, and even now, some of the hospitals are being overwhelmed again, so they can't allow. Having a family member is stressful for the hospital. They need to have two people. They have to escort you. They have to get a person to escort you, and then tell you how to put the PPE on, and then how to take it off. And so it's not like just stumbling into the hospital and saying hi to your mom. It takes a team, and you're taking nurses away from patients. And so, in a way, we were kind of lucky that my mom was part of the first second wave in California, where the hospital wasn't overwhelmed at that time.
Right.
I mean, I've seen like footage of stuff out of McAllen, Texas, where people, patients don't even have their own rooms. They're just sitting next to each other. Some of them are sitting. They don't have beds. They're sitting. They have COVID and they're sitting in a hospital.
Right.
And it's awful. I feel so bad for those family members because it made such a big difference to be able to tell her mom in person, we're here. And I could take my mom's hand. Now, I was covered in plastic. It wasn't skin on skin like you want it to be. But I could take her hand and hold it and tell her I'm here. We played music. I was dancing with my mom, right? And she knew we were there. She tried to communicate with us, and it was like a great effort, and she wasn't able to, but she knew we were there. And I think that made a huge difference for her too. So it's awful that families aren't being allowed to have that interaction, I guess it's depending on how prepared the hospital is and how overwhelmed they are.
Yeah. Well, I was, one of the many following along, and you so beautifully walked that line as you do of being searingly funny and irreverent, but also so deeply loving and paying respect to your mother and her life and the relationship. So thank you for sharing that and for being, as I said, so open and vulnerable with such an intimate part of life.
Thank you. It didn't feel like a big deal. I mean, her death felt like the big deal, but the tweeting felt like a relief for me to do something besides just watch her on an iPad. So.
Yeah. And I guess in a way that's the way comedians you just did what we all do, except you shared it, right? Like, because we're always thinking of the joke or thinking of like the absurdity in a situation, but you took it to the next level and actually shared it. And I think you're probably hearing a lot of stories, but I'm sure you've helped both with your book about your dad and tweeting that process, and also with your mom. I'm sure you've touched a lot of people and helped a lot of people. So,
hope so.
Yeah.
Thanks.
You're welcome. So maybe if we can pivot
to something more fun.
From death to rape.
I love your new talk show, Ted. It's a comic's dream.
I'm trying to start something new here. So obviously, Laurie, for you having been out in LA for as long as you have, and you and I know each other very well from the New York scene for over a decade.
Yeah.
So you certainly are intimately aware of both scenes. So I guess just kind of broadly speaking, what were some of the thoughts that have been occurring to you? I know you've been outspoken on Twitter about all of the things that have been happening, but what are some of the thoughts you've been having as the Chris D'Elia accusations and started coming down the pike and coming out on Twitter and social media, and now, of course, with Bryan Callen being accused of rape and sexual assault and other various troubling behaviors? What were your thoughts? I know it's a broad question, but I hope it makes sense.
Within that, like, I loved how the word used ecosystem. That sort of boys kind of a thing. I mean, that's sort of always existed in stand-up, right? And when I started in '87, it was like, okay, that's what you had to work with. That's who you had to work with to get to be on stage, right? So I got used to a lot of stuff I probably shouldn't have got used to, and just kind of blew it off, or I don't know. It also feels so old. Like it's like, oh, that people still have that point of view. That's so like Porky's Revenge, right?
That's a great reference. Yeah.
But that's where that point of view seems like it's rooted, and so it's so strange to me that there are like newer comics that have that point of view. Although, as you pointed out, they're not really newer. And Callen's older than you. He's 2 years younger than me.
Yeah.
I'm sure he hates that's out. Love it.
That was the real dagger.
Yes. You can't deny being 53. You can deny rape charges, but not your age.
Right. Well, he said he categorically denied all of it, so maybe the age was part of what he meant.
That can only mean he's 54.
Right.
But so it's always existed, and it's always been gross and annoying. I was just surprised that it kept going, and then I don't know, I think podcasts keep it going.
Sure.
A lot of these guys have very rabid fans, and like you said, like even if they do try to open up a little bit, their fans go at them, you know, and so there's not they create a space where there's not room for them to change at all or reconsider things that they've had a position on, right? Like, so it's tough for, I want to say tough for them, but they get locked in the room that they put themselves in.
Sure.
I guess.
And it's a lucrative room. It's a room that, as I said, these types of behaviors, these types of points of view are rewarded, you know, financially among those rewards. So, I'm sorry. Yeah.
Oh, no, I agree. And there's a lot of guys who have podcasts with no audience and sometimes no guest, and they are just talking to people that agree with them. And so they don't get, like, at least if you're on stage performing, you know, or, you know, in Zoom performing, you'll get feedback on an idea you have, and people won't laugh or they'll whatever, but that helps. That's been my experience on Zoom shows. Yeah. The audience guides you, right? They tell you what you can get away with and stuff. And so a lot of these guys, I think a couple of years ago, maybe when road comedy started getting paying less or something, people started doing their own shows and having no response at all from an audience. And so at that point, you can just say anything you want, and you know, you won't get much pushback. And so you're not even rewarded for trying to think or trying to come up with a nuanced view, because there's no one to frown at you when you go off the rails on a tag. I mean, I'm working on a chunk now. I'm like, I can't even tell if this is good or not, because I can't trust a Zoom audience really. And I really need an audience, like a multiracial audience, if I'm talking about race, to tell me, is this okay for me to say? Am I on the right path? Is this funny to all of us, right? Or most of us? Yes. So that's just with a chunk of material. And I think when people are becoming really political and, you know, going down that road, there's just no one to push back. And then you just you can go down some really dark and disturbing paths, you know, like QAnon or something like that, you know?
That's right. No, it's not unrelated. You know, those things are kind of, again, to use the word ecosystem, right? They're kind of tangential to one another a lot of times. So can I say something? Please. Just like before podcasts and stuff, like comics would they'd get to a certain point and they were either going to quit or they're going to lean in or get a writing job or something like that, right? And the ones that quit would leave the business completely, become car salesmen, become, you know, some sort of thing that you maybe use their comedic ability, real estate, but it was totally out of stand-up. And I feel like now a lot of guys, mostly guys, hit that ceiling and they just go into a podcast. And it's not a, I mean, maybe it makes enough money, but it's not healthy, you know? Yeah. It's like half comedy. It's not all comedy. You don't have the audience to help you. Yeah, and I think you know, you talked about the movies, the Porky's movies from, you know, like our adolescence, but I even think back to the comedy of that time, whether it's Andrew Dice Clay or Eddie Murphy. You know, the biggest stars in the business really wouldn't fly now, and that's a good thing. You know, like I think Eddie Murphy has even said, like, I can't watch my stuff from that time. You know, so
and Kinnison too, right?
And Kinnison too, all the biggest. You know, and we were all laughing. I mean, I was. You know, we were all laughing to some extent. But you know that, and I think, you know, what you're talking about with this podcast ecosystem now, it's a continuation of 1980s Andrew Dice Clay or
Yeah.
1980s Eddie Murphy in the way they talk about women, in the way they talk about conquest, or just kind of that dismissal of the core humanity of another person.
Yes.
It's very flippant. The joke is that, you know, they don't matter. Of course, they don't matter.
And it's interesting because I've been this woman. There's always one woman to co-sign on all of it by
Sure.
laughing, you know, and I've been
Sure.
there because
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
feel like I don't have a choice. I got to go along with it. Guys seem cool. Like, you know, I want to work and whatever. And I want
Yeah.
these guys to like me.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so you go along with it, you know? So I remember being that. So when I see that, I'm like, ugh, you know, but whatever, everyone's on their own journey. But,
Well, yeah,
yeah.
and that's interesting because I think it is important to acknowledge the journey in all of this, the evolution in all of this for each of us, you know, and it is each at their own pace, you know. So certainly, as you said, you know, you've done things that you wouldn't do now, and likewise, you know, whether it's jokes that I've told or just being present in conversations or things where it's, especially as a guy, it's easier to just laugh than to say, like, you know, I think that's really disrespectful towards women, you know, like stuff like that.
I know. You can't. I know. I mean, there's so many scenarios where I can't imagine what would happen if you said that. Besides that, you'd be like just like a pack of feature acts would just attack you.
Exactly. So let me ask you that. Speaking of journeys and evolution, how for you? Because I have noticed in recent years that you're not pulling any punches. You're telling it like it is. And I have such deep respect for that and admiration as far as sharing your thoughts on all of these types of things. So specifically as it pertains to Bryan Callen, you know, like when you came across that article in the New York Times, like what were your thoughts? What were, you know,
Yeah,
I'm
the
sure
LA
you know,
Times.
him as do I.
You know, I just met him once and he was nice to me. You know, I didn't really know. I think I mixed him. There's a couple of Bryans with a Y that I'm like, they're all one Bryan to me. But he's
well. Now there's one distinction that I think you should note.
Yes, no, he separated himself. He really has. You know, I mean what I read, just her account, just Tigerman's account. I was like, yeah, that happened. That is how women report rape. I do a podcast with Jackie Cation. I think the thing is we're we're born 4 days apart, and so we're the same age. And part of me feels like I'm not trying to do well in show business anymore.
Same.
I'm like,
I announced my retirement.
They've made their they've made their judgment. They made their decision about me, and it was no, thank you. You're on your own. Sure. That's how it felt, right? And now I'm 55. It's not like there's going to be some grand resurgence unless I hang on till I'm 80. Like that's my new thing. Like before, I was like, hopefully by the time I'm 35, right? So I guess I do feel a little free. I also feel free because I have a writing job, so I have money coming in, and so. You know, I'm not completely dependent on getting on Joe Rogan's podcast, so I can get, you know, road work, which you can't do anymore. So, so I guess you know that money brings you that kind of freedom as well. So and I guess I feel like as a middle-aged woman, you're like that ignored thing now, and no one sees you as sexual or anything. So you actually do have the freedom to talk a little bit more. You know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
No, and I think, you know, there's strength in numbers too, because as you said, you and Jackie have a podcast together, and you're both such great comedians with such unflinching takes on everything. So there's strength, I'm sure, in doing the podcast together. Have you found that to be kind of, I don't know if emboldening is the word, but like, has that kind of freed you up even further to know that you're kind of, you've got your amigo?
Yeah, if I'm like, at least I have Jackie on my side. There's been times where I've called her, I'm like, was that too much? No, that guy's a fucking asshole. Fuck that guy. Okay, thank God. So that's always helpful. And you know, there's also like, I guess I still have this fear of alienating comics from my the people that I wanted to like me when I first started that are still in the business.
Right.
But then there's like these new comics that don't give a fuck about the 55-year-old comics, the 60-year-old comics that were such badasses back in the day.
Right.
And they have they don't seem to be angry at us for calling that shit out. They kind of seem to like it.
Yes.
So there's hope in that, I think, with this next generation of comics coming up, right? Like especially the women, they don't put up with fucking shit. And
It's great.
Jackie and I many times have been like, wow, I mean, I guess we should have said something when that happened to us too, you know? Like it literally, we just got so numb to it that it didn't occur to us, you know. Like people have said about Louis with the, you know, it's like, that's your workplace. And I was like, no, it's not a workplace. But it was a workplace. What was I thinking? You know? And so
right.
if I go back and look at my entire comedy history, you know, I wasn't raped or sexually assaulted or anything like that by stand-ups. When that stuff happened, it was a different world. But I put up with a lot of shit and a lot of feeling unsafe and a lot of just running back to my hotel as soon as my set, you know, because I didn't want anyone to think I was, you know, asking for it.
Right.
Should something happen to me. So, you know, that years of doing that kind of, you know, it turns you a certain way and it makes you numb to certain stuff. And it's kind of cool to see, you know, comics not being numb to that.
No, it is cool. And I think that's part and parcel of kind of what we're seeing societally across the board with the social justice movements, with Me Too, with, you know, activism is so mainstream now that like kids that are teenagers are growing up in this age where to protest is like the most natural inclination. Like it, you know, when we grew up, it was almost, I think growing up like post the 60s and all of the residue of that, like activism was almost entirely put to bed and marginalized. But it's heartening to see you know, this generation of young people, and as you said, comedians as well, who do not hesitate to call out bullshit. And it's great also because I think what you alluded to earlier with the mentality of, you know, and I think I'm almost embarrassed in certain ways of how it was ingrained in me, and I think it's only natural, but just that hesitation to assess like certain relationships or assess, you know, the pros and cons of speaking up in certain situations, or so seeing the bravery kind of almost chastises like my younger self of, like you said with you and Jackie, like, oh shit, I guess, you know, I should have, you know, I guess everybody has those kinds of regrets, but it is heartening to see the younger generation like not equivocating.
Yeah, I mean the ways I would talk myself into that certain behavior was okay, you know, because it was so hard to get work. Like you had to get a VHS tape, send it, hope the person watched it. By the time you get to the club, if something is funky at the club, you know, the condo is unsafe, you're staying with a headliner that makes you uncomfortable or feel weird, you're not going to say anything because it took you like 2 years to get this guy to book you for a $500 week. So you would never say anything. You would just hope the next time you came back it was a different headliner. And you know, I feel like there's less putting up with that shit, which is cool.
No, it's true, and it's good to see. And I think, you know, with the world falling apart to the extent that it does help to not give a shit, you know, and to even further kind of speak in your integrity. And I don't think these things are unrelated, that, you know, and to me, when you zoom out, it's the beauty of these movements and of social justice and people stepping up one after the other. Because I think you can't really divorce like these women speaking out about Bryan Callen from what happened to Crystalia, from what happened in Me Too, from what happened with Black Lives Matter. Like there is this thing in the air now that is really kind of part of the zeitgeist that no, I'm not. I'm not going to stay silent. And granted, you know, as is often the case with rape survivors, obviously it happens at whatever timetable the person feels comfortable with. But I don't think it's any accident that the timing, happened now.
Yeah, I mean, I think she said the Crystalia stuff kind of made her remember it or
Hmm.
realize,
Hmm.
that's, I don't know. I
Hmm.
don't know exactly how it helped her make that decision, but,
Right.
you know, like I feel like we know more about how rape victims report things. We know how
Hmm.
they will hold on to something for decades.
Hmm.
That they tell somebody close to them frequently. I mean, it's a template almost. So unless you think someone's plotting in 1999, that a template will be established in 2020, that her telling people in 2006 and whatever her the timeline was, it just doesn't make any sense. Like, what's the most
Yeah.
logical thing? Yeah, this guy raped her. You
Yeah.
know.
No, I agree. I agree.
And I, Dalia that's gross, but
Yeah.
that's different from what Callen did, you know?
Yes. Yes. Yeah. Isn't it great that we can say, no, no, what Louis did is different than
I
Dalia,
know.
and what
Yes.
Dalia did,
It's
like,
nice to have so many examples for the kids to look at in
yes,
2022.
yes. Comedy should be taught in every school now as to how not to behave.
Degrees of sexual assault.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Crazy. Um, well, Laurie, maybe just kind of to wrap up, talking about you talked about the workplace, and it's funny because so many of us got into comedy to really avoid like the traditional workplace and
Yeah.
to
Right.
avoid like, I can say whatever the fuck I want, and just not having those restrictions, of societal norms and stuff.
Hmm.
But obviously these things go beyond that. So like it's such a weird time because obviously comedy is shut down in New York and I would imagine LA for the year. And who knows like what even our quote unquote workplaces will even look like going forward. But do you like if 20-year-old 25-year-old Laurie was starting now, like do you see like a real shift in the comedy culture now? Do you think this is the beginnings of kind of weeding out all of these types of things? And if you were to start now, it would be like a refreshing kind of like you could kind of breathe and be yourself?
No.
No.
Well, I mean, what I assume, since that mentality is still here, even though I thought it would go away 30 years ago, is it's going to be here in 10 years as well.
Mm,
But the cool thing is there's room for other voices. There's room for you if you don't want to hang out with that crew. There's clubs for you if you like. Even I
yeah.
even felt like, oh, do I really want to comment on this thing? Because what if I want to try to get past the Comedy Store? Is this, am I going to be seen as some snitch? Like, because I'm retweeting an LA Times article,
Yeah.
but
Right. Right.
but maybe that wouldn't have the effect I would worry that it would have. Maybe that's my old mentality of when I was coming up, where if bookers weren't that didn't want any trouble, right? They didn't want anyone with trouble, and now it seems,
Sure. Sure.
I mean, if the store has they have a lot of people on the lineup that aren't like that too. So
Mm.
I don't know. I don't even think I just answered your question, but I would say
No.
that there's different. I mean, we're all going to be fucked, right?
Yeah.
I don't know what clubs will be open, and I don't know how they'll make money if they can only bring 50 people into a room. You know,
Hmm. Sure.
I I don't understand the math of it, and however comedy's going to proceed, we're all going to be in this, in the same sort of boat, looking for the kind of venue we can work in.
Yeah.
So it partially is being destroyed, what exists now, um,
Well,
and we'll see. We'll see. I don't
yeah.
know.
Yeah. Well, maybe you can live tweet the death of comedy.
I think all of my tweets are a live tweet of the death of comedy.
That's true. That's true. Well, Laurie, thank you so much for coming on the show. You're the best. And
thank
again,
you, Ted.
You're
so
welcome.
Fun.
Yeah.
You're the best. I love you. You're great.
I love you too. And
yeah.
my condolences to you and your family. Wishing you the best.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks.
Bye, Laurie.
Bye.